My name is Scott Fellows. I am a teaching assistant superintendent in Regional School District Number 1 in Connecticut. I'm also the chair of the math department at the high school, and I teach one section of AP Calculus at the high school.
So you are one busy guy.
A little bit busy, yes, but it's fantastic having a foot in both worlds is awesome.
So Scott, I know that this has been a really wild year this past year, and we all hoped it was over, but I think we're all a little nervous that maybe we're still facing some wild stuff this year. So tell me a little bit about it. What were some of the things, just a few things that you took away from last year that you really were impressed by?
So I think that from our perspective here, the way that our faculties in all 7 of our schools, I would say, embraced new technologies that they had never used before and really got themselves up to speed and using them appropriately and to really make a difference in student learning was amazing. And it was really, really impressive. I would say as well, we have building coaches in most of our buildings. And in all of the buildings, the building coaches took a really key role in helping teachers to understand that technology, but also just to understand different ways to interact with kids who are on a screen as opposed to interacting with students who are sitting in front of you. And here at the high school, they had a Wednesday morning. We had Wednesdays as a remote day for the entire year. So our coaches, our building level coaches, spent a lot of time Wednesday mornings working with teachers and encouraging anybody could show up. And sometimes there was a specific topic, and sometimes there was let's just talk about what's been going on in classes. And it was fantastic. And it allowed for a level of conversation that, believe it or not, doesn't happen often during the school day in a high school. The number of people that showed up for those 7:30 Wednesday morning meetings was 75% of the faculty. It was fantastic. And they all, to a one, report getting lots and lots and lots of good information out of it. So it's great.
So that's really interesting because it segues to my next question to you, which
great.
is, what do you not want to lose? Are you thinking about how that will impact what you do next year?
I don't know. And that one's going to be hard to do, right? Because it was a consequence of the change in the way that we do things. So we had that time Wednesday mornings to do those meetings where we don't have that time now every week during the upcoming school year. I'm hoping that they can keep that up in other time periods. So, we can do during lunch, they could be running those sessions. There are other times during the day that hopefully they'll continue that. But I think what it also did was get people talking to each other. And once people start talking to each other, really good ideas start to flow. And the more that we can do that over the course of the next year, the better we're going to be for it as we work our way through the year. And we're going to put in place, we actually have plans right now to put in place some teacher observations of other teachers with a little bit of feedback at the end, hopefully around 2 big ideas that we just talked about, formative assessment and habits of mind. And we just spoke yesterday about the idea of using pineapple boards and writing on the pineapple board, like, I'm trying something new with implementing habits of mind into my math class. Please stop in and give me some feedback. And I'm hoping that based on the conversations that happened last year on Wednesdays, we can have those conversations become outstanding now around some really focused school-wide initiatives.
So it's almost like Tuesdays with Maury. It's kind of like we're having Wednesday mornings every day. Absolutely. And so what will that look like? And so one of the things you're saying is what it'll look like is powerful conversations that are collaborative and community-based.
Yes.
And so you're also saying that you chose this year to particularly put an emphasis on habits of mind as well as on assessment. How do you see that as being important given what you've learned?
Yeah, so habits of mind, to be honest about it, and then I'll say, like, we love it now, right? It started in our elementary schools. So we were not congruent with our elementary schools for a couple of years. And with Lisa Carter moving next door into the superintendent's office, she really wants that continuity between what kids are doing in our K-8 schools and what's happening at the high school. So Habits of Mind were being driven a little bit by the need to, let's get started with where our elementary schools are. But I think now that we've started to look at them, we're saying these are things that we want kids to know and be able to do, and to be able to talk about their own learning when they're having conversations with teachers. And it came up just yesterday in a conversation that we had about our NYP grade, and what does a student need to do to make up that NYP grade? And how are we going to encourage them to be visible in their learning? And how better to do that than to talk about habits of mind, about taking risks, about persevering. And we need to teach them some of those things in the high school. The formative assessment piece came from we had a lot of kids who had NYPs, and assessment seemed, in my mind, to be more about completing a task than it was about learning the content. So by focusing on formative assessment, we're hoping that we'll change the culture in our building from one of, I have to take this quiz, to how am I demonstrating what I've learned? And if it's not on this quiz because I did poorly on it and I need to reassess, then let me think about some other ways that I can demonstrate that I know this content, that is not necessarily just repeating the quiz that, another version of the quiz that I took last week. And we're hoping to allow kids some latitude in how they do that, which then will provide us with the information that we really want. Have you learned the content or have you not learned the content? As opposed to what's happening now with the NYPs is that students are waiting longer and longer and longer to take their reassessments. And we had an example last year. Damon Osar, who's our English department chair, brought an example from last year that the student had waited 158 days
Wow.
to turn in the paper. 158 days. And that was never what the NYP process was supposed to be. So we want to catch it earlier with the formative assessments, make sure that they're good, that they are quality, and they're providing the teacher with the information that's going to be helpful for them to adjust their instruction. And then we're hoping that's going to say, all right, now I know you know how to do it. I can assess you summatively, and you're not going to just get an NYP or bomb the quiz or the test or whatever.
So just so in case anybody doesn't know what NYP means, not yet proficient.
Yes.
And what you're saying is that what you do is you give the students an opportunity to show that maybe not yet, but perhaps now I could, but you don't want it to be an eternity between taking it and then the next time. So that's certainly understandable. So as you think as a leader about all of this, and anything else that's been going on inside. I mean, this was your first big year of leadership, really, which is a strange year to have it. Yes. So, tell us a story or two about, something you learned as a leader.
That's a really good question. Wow. So I think that one of the things that I can't say that I learned it this year, but it was made exceedingly clear to me this year, is something that a principal said to me probably 20 years ago. And that is, we were sitting in her office at a table, just chatting about something. I don't even remember what it was, what we were chatting about. And she looked me straight in the face and said, Scott, you think that everybody here thinks the way you do. They don't. And I'm like, well, why not? Like, this is how things are supposed to be. So what's the weirdness of that? But how often that is the case. That's one of the things that has happened this year, is how many times there have been any number of times where I've come back and said, okay, I was making the assumption that everybody was where I was thinking what I was thinking. Now I'm going to tone it back and see let's do some formative assessment to determine where the people on the faculty are, and start with where they are and build their understanding and knowledge and capacity, so that eventually we are all at that same place. And I think that's my big takeaway here. I think that other than that, it's been, I have been the chair of the math department for a really long time. So, and I've been on the leadership team forever and the negotiations chair forever. So I've done some leadership things. The other thing that I didn't get to do this year that I am so wanting to do more of next year is to get into our elementary schools and really see what's happening in our elementary schools. There, I discovered that there is no room in a building more fun than the pre-K classroom.
That's for sure.
And nobody in my world would ever have thought that I would step foot in a pre-K classroom. And yet they were fantastic. They're the most adorable kids who will do almost anything. I learned in a K classroom that if you're taller than they are, they'll ask you a question. If they have a question, they're going to ask it to you because you're taller than them and you must know the answer. And that was, it's those kinds of things, what's happening in the younger grades that I'm going to move my own learning is going to start to work on for next year.
And what's really interesting is you may just learn what it means to be self-directed, because those little ones follow and figure out, and the teachers are very explicit and clear. And before you know it, they actually are self-managing in a way that sometimes our high school students forget how to do. Yes, they're still waiting to be told.
Well, and Bena, it's so funny you bring that one up, because I would say that I was in a kindergarten classroom. Now, it happened to be the classroom of someone with whom I went to high school. So I know this teacher very, very well. We actually went to grammar school together. So we've known each other since we were 5. And she just happens to be the kindergarten teacher in one of our buildings. And so I went down and I said, I really just want to see reading instruction, because that is totally not my world. So I want to see what reading instruction looks like. And I'll read them something at the end, which will be really cool because I love reading to little kids. It's awesome. So I observed, and she had this little part of her room where she would pull individual kids over to read to. But she had given the other students in the class, the other 15 kids in her class, a task on which to work. And there were actually 2. So if you finish the first one, then you can go on to the second one. But none of them were going to do that because the first one was long enough to occupy the reading time. And they did it, and they were not talking. They weren't loud. They weren't running around the room screaming. They weren't asking to go to the bathroom. They just did it. And I'm wondering now, where do they stop doing that? Because the concern in high school is always, if I put kids into groups, it's going to be chaos behind me while I'm working with this small group in front of me. And we have to figure out what is the magic sauce that kindergarten and first grade teachers have? But more than that, where does that stop? And how are we going to stop it from stopping? There's no reason we couldn't do that. Behind me is the high school. So over there, and have them have small groups with a teacher and other kids working independently on things that they can do and should do. Be awesome.
So that sounds like it leads us to the last question, which is, do you have an aspiration for next year? Is there something that you're aspiring to with your leadership and where the school goes?
For the high school in particular, that improvement in assessment and the reduction in the NYPs, and I hate that my vernacular right now is so much about a grade, because really what I want is the entire district to stop talking about grades and assessments and start talking about student learning. And I don't want conversations that start with the student. I'd like all of our teachers to start conversations with what did I do that caused this behavior? What did I do that caused 80% of my kids to not be successful on an assessment? And start looking at it from the lens of what can I do and change in my own practice, as opposed to going right to the students didn't study, they didn't do their homework, all of those things. And if we can move to become a place where teachers are looking at themselves very reflectively, and we base our conversations on learning, not on grading, not on you can get an A or a B, but rather, how does this piece of paper that you've given me demonstrate your learning of the important content of my class? Then our kids will be so well prepared to go to whatever they do when they leave high school. It'll be fantastic.
So that's a beautiful aspiration and probably doable. It's just a matter of, how you're going to manage that to happen. But it sounds like what you're saying is you're going to be leading them. I heard a couple of things that really struck me. One is that you'd like them to pay attention to the idea that high school should not be a time when you're less self-directed. It should be a time when you find a way to direct yourself and own your learning. And when you own your learning, then you're really talking about the idea that not yet proficient has some meaning, because if I own the desire to be proficient, maybe I'll be able to then showcase that I am. But that also means that we all have to be thinking flexibly. We all have to be open to lots of different options. And so the habits of mind are going to be something that you're going to use to help people to start to think about, how do we help ourselves think more independently, more flexibly, more taking more risks with ourselves. And with all of that, hopefully you're going to have kids who have the most knockout resume when they graduate than ever before.
Absolutely. 100%.